Imagine a country where adult diapers actually outsell baby
It
diapers.
sounds totally made up.
Right. It sounds like a detail from, some dystopian science fiction novel, but it isn't fiction. That is the current everyday reality in Japan right now.
Yeah, it's pretty staggering when you look at it.
We are looking at a world where maternity wards are they're being shut down and entirely converted into nursing homes,
Yeah.
and where ghost villages are just appearing because there simply aren't enough young people left to live in them. So welcome to your English listening practice. Today, we are unpacking a massive, almost invisible shift happening all across the globe. Based on our own research and personal insights, we are exploring why the entire world is suddenly having fewer children.
It is a profound demographic earthquake. And, what is truly fascinating here is that it's happening right in front of our eyes, yet it often goes completely unnoticed in our daily lives until you look at the macro level data.
Exactly. Now, our mission today is twofold. First, we want to explore this global phenomenon with you, our listener. We want to investigate the hidden reasons behind it and the massive, potentially terrifying impact it's going to have on our collective future.
Absolutely.
But second, our goal is to help you level up your language skills. We know you are an intermediate English learner operating at what we call the B2 level. So you already have a solid grasp of the language, but you're looking to master more complex vocabulary and, engage with huge global ideas without feeling overwhelmed.
That is precisely our aim. And to achieve that, we have a very specific dynamic setup for our conversation today. We are acting as your guides.
Right.
As native English speakers and teaching experts, we're going to take these high-level societal concepts and nuanced vocabulary words and integrate them naturally into our discussion. We aren't going to just read you dictionary definitions.
Yeah, definitely not.
Instead, we're going to show you exactly how these words function in real analytical conversations.
Yeah, so I'm going to be bringing up the surprising facts, the big data points, and the cultural shifts we've researched. And my partner here is going to help us look at the deeper meaning, analyzing the underlying mechanics of, why this is all happening.
I'm ready when you are.
Awesome. So let's jump straight in. We have to start by looking backward. Because to understand why nobody is having kids today, we really need to understand why everyone had so many kids in the past.
Right. Context is everything.
Yeah, we've established that for most of human history, a large family was just the default setting. If you look back 100 or 200 years, having 5, 6, or even 10 children was incredibly common across the globe.
It was the absolute norm, and the fundamental reason for those large families was tied directly to the agrarian economy. We are talking about farming societies.
Right.
In that context, children were not viewed merely as a joy or, personal fulfillment. They were an absolute requirement for economic survival.
Okay, I want to pause on that phrase for our listeners. Economic survival. We aren't just talking about paying a few bills here. We are talking about the literal ability to keep your family from starving through the winter. Okay, let's unpack this. Think of a family in the past like a small business where everyone, even the kids, had a job to do just to survive.
Precisely. When we discuss economic survival in a historical, agricultural context, we have to remember that a family was essentially a small, self-contained business. Before the Industrial Revolution, before giant diesel tractors and, automated farming machines, human hands had to do absolutely everything.
Yeah, the physical labor was immense.
You had to clear the land, plant the seeds, fetch the water, feed the livestock, and harvest the crops before they rotted in the fields.
Right. Think about the pure physical effort involved. If you owned a farm in the 1800s, you couldn't exactly afford to hire outside workers.
No, you couldn't.
So your children were essentially your built-in unpaid workforce.
Yeah.
A 6-year-old could easily collect eggs and feed the chickens. An 8-year-old could pull weeds. A 12-year-old could guide a plow or milk the cows.
It sounds harsh to modern ears, but it's true.
In that world, children were an economic asset. Every child you had was a new worker who, within a few short years, would produce far more calories than they consumed. More children directly equaled a better chance at economic survival.
And what's fascinating here is that that was the core mechanism of the past. Children were an economic necessity. But if we trace this forward to the modern era, particularly in developed countries, that dynamic completely inverts.
It totally flips.
It does, and developed countries is a critical term here. When we use this phrase, we are describing nations that have gone through massive industrialization and modernization. They have complex economies, high levels of technological infrastructure, strong healthcare systems, and advanced educational institutions. We are talking about places like Germany, Canada, South Korea, and the United Kingdom.
Right. And in these developed countries, the landscape has entirely transformed. The vast majority of the population no longer lives on farms. We moved to towns, then to sprawling cities. We invented machines to do the heavy lifting.
Exactly.
Consequently, the physical labor of a child is no longer required to keep the family fed. In fact, we recognized how harsh that life was, and child labor is now strictly illegal in these developed nations. Society has collectively decided that children belong in classrooms, not in coal mines or cornfields.
Which completely flips the financial equation of parenthood. If children are no longer needed to generate income for the family, what is their economic role?
Well, their new role is to be incredibly expensive.
Yes, very much so.
They transition from being, free labor that helps you survive to becoming what some economists coldly call the ultimate luxury expense, which naturally brings us to the financial reality of modern parenting. When you ask people today why they aren't having kids, the very first thing they will tell you is that they simply cannot afford it.
The rising cost of living is universally cited as the primary barrier. And this isn't just a vague complaint, it is a structural economic reality, particularly when it comes to the housing market in modern cities.
Yeah, let's take our time and unpack the phrase cost of living so our listeners understand the sheer weight of it in this context.
Good idea.
The cost of living isn't just the price of a cup of coffee. It represents the baseline amount of money required to maintain a certain standard of living. It's the rent for your apartment or the mortgage on your house. It's the grocery bill, the utility bills for electricity and water, the cost of transportation, and the taxes you pay.
It's everything.
And over the last few decades, while average wages have grown relatively slowly, the cost of living, especially housing, has absolutely skyrocketed.
Right. Think about a young couple in their late 20s living in a major economic hub, say London, Toronto, or Tokyo. They're both working full-time jobs. Just to secure a 2-bedroom apartment, which is a space marginally big enough to raise a single child, they are likely spending 40, 50, or even 60% of their combined monthly income on rent alone. That leaves precious little for anything else.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here and push back slightly on modern expectations. I hear this argument all the time. But didn't our grandparents also face tough economic times?
They certainly did.
They had kids during recessions, during wars, and when the standard of living was objectively much lower. So are things mathematically that much harder today, or are parents just worrying more about having perfect financial stability before they even try?
That is a phenomenal question, and the answer is that it's a volatile mixture of both. Yes, housing is mathematically much more expensive today relative to average incomes, but you are absolutely right about the shift in expectations.
Yeah.
The standard of what society deems an acceptable childhood has inflated dramatically. This is what we might call the arms race of modern parenting.
Oh, wow. The arms race. I love that term. Tell me more about how that works.
Well, in the 1950s, a middle-class parent might have been perfectly content having 3 children share a single small bedroom. They wore secondhand clothes, they played out in the street until dinner time, and if they got decent grades in the local public school, that was considered a success.
Right. It was much simpler.
But today, the baseline expectations have shifted. Modern parents feel a crushing burden to provide optimal conditions. They feel each child requires their own bedroom. They need to provide organic food, extracurricular activities like violin lessons or coding camps, and they need to save tens of thousands of dollars for future university tuition.
It's the pressure to optimize the child. And if you feel you can't provide that absolute gold standard, you feel like a failure before you even begin.
Exactly. And a huge component of that cost, one that completely breaks the bank for many young couples, is childcare.
Yes, let's explore that word, childcare, because for our B2 learners, it might sound like a simple combination of child and care.
It does sound simple.
But in an economic discussion, it represents a massive, complex industry. When we talk about childcare today, we are talking about the expensive service of paying trained professionals to watch, educate, and protect your infant or toddler while you and your partner go to work.
Historically, families lived in multi-generational homes. You had a grandmother, an aunt, or older siblings around to watch the baby. It was an informal, free system built into the fabric of the community.
Right.
Today, young people move hundreds of miles away from their hometowns to find jobs in big cities. They are isolated. When they have a baby, they have no free, built-in support network.
Not at all.
Since the high cost of living usually requires both parents to work full-time just to pay the rent, they are forced to turn to commercial childcare centers or hire private nannies.
And the cost is staggering. In many developed countries, putting a single toddler into full-time, high-quality childcare can cost as much as or more than renting a second apartment.
It really can.
It can literally wipe out one parent's entire salary. You have couples sitting at their kitchen tables running the math and realizing that going to work just to pay the childcare center leaves them with $0 extra at the end of the month.
Which brings us directly to the concept of financial stability. Young adults today are obsessed with achieving financial stability before they take on the burden of parenthood.
Let's give our listeners some context on that phrase. Financial stability is like the holy grail for modern adults. It doesn't mean being rich.
No, not wealthy.
It means having a secure, predictable income, having an emergency fund saved in the bank so a sudden car repair doesn't ruin you, and having manageable levels of debt. It is the psychological feeling of economic safety.
But because of the rising cost of living and the inflated expectations of modern parenting we just talked about, the finish line for achieving financial stability keeps moving further and further away.
Yeah, it's a moving target.
People tell themselves, we will have a baby as soon as we feel financially stable. But they don't feel stable at 25. They don't feel stable at 30. Suddenly, they are 35. They finally have a bit of savings, and they realize they only have the time and energy for one child.
That transition from 25 to 35 is crucial, and it perfectly sets up our next major factor. It isn't just about the money. It is about the timeline of a human life, and specifically the timeline of women's lives.
Absolutely.
The empowerment of women, their access to higher education, and their entry into professional careers is arguably one of the most incredible, positive transformations in human history. But it has a very direct, undeniable mathematical impact on birth rates.
It completely rewrites the script of adult life.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture to understand this, we need to compare the modern era with previous generations.
Okay, yeah.
When we use the phrase previous generations in everyday English, we're talking about the cohorts of people who lived before us. So our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents.
Right. So if we look at a woman from a previous generation, perhaps your grandmother in the 1950s or 1960s, her path was often very linear and heavily restricted by society. She likely finished high school, perhaps worked for a year or two as a secretary or a teacher, and was socially expected to marry by age 20 or 21. By 22, she was having her first baby.
And from a purely biological standpoint, a woman who begins having children at age 22 has a massive window of fertility ahead of her. She has a solid 15 to 20 years where she can easily have 4, 5, or 6 children. That was the standard timeline.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's just basic math. If you start a family 10 years later than your grandmother did, you simply have less time to have a large number of children.
Exactly.
Today, that traditional timeline has been completely dismantled. Today, a young woman finishes high school and goes to a university for 4 years. Then she might realize that to get a competitive job, she needs a master's degree, which takes another 2 years.
Right.
She graduates at 24, heavily in debt. She then enters the corporate world and spends the next 6 to 8 years working aggressively, putting in long hours to prove herself, secure promotions, and climb the ladder.
She is doing all of this to become financially independent. This is a crucial concept for our listeners. To be financially independent means you do not rely on anyone else, not your parents, and certainly not a spouse for your economic survival.
Yeah.
You earn your own money, you pay your own rent, and you have complete autonomy over your life choices.
It is ultimate freedom. A financially independent woman doesn't need to rush into a marriage just to secure a roof over her head. She can take her time finding the right partner.
Yes, she can.
But here is where the math catches up with us. By the time she has finished her education, built her career, become financially independent, and found a partner she actually wants to build a life with, she might be 32, 34, or even 36 years old.
Exactly. The timeline of adult milestones has been pushed back by a full decade or more, and human biology has not evolved to match this new timeline.
No, it hasn't.
If you start trying to have your first child at age 35, The biological window is closing rapidly. Even if that couple deeply desires to have 4 children, starting at 35 makes achieving that physically and practically very difficult. Secondary infertility becomes a real issue.
Right.
The pregnancies take a harder toll on the body, and quite frankly, the parents just have less energy.
It is a profound trade-off.
Yeah.
We traded early motherhood for education and financial independence, which is an incredible victory for human rights and equality. But the side effect is that the years previously dedicated to raising a large brood of children are now dedicated to personal and professional development.
And that focus on personal development ties deeply into the cultural atmosphere of our time. It isn't just that we are working longer hours. The very nature of what we desire out of life has changed. We have moved into an era defined by a highly individualistic urban lifestyle.
This is where the psychology gets really interesting. Let's dig into the word individualistic, because it represents a massive philosophical shift. For our B2 learners, an individualistic culture is one that prioritizes the needs, the desires, and the self-actualization of the single person above the expectations of the wider community or the extended family. You are focusing on yourself and your personal goals.
In more traditional, community-focused societies, you made choices based on duty. You married who your family approved of, you took over the family farm.
Right.
You had children because it was your duty to continue the family lineage and strengthen the community. Your personal desires were secondary to the group's survival.
But an individualistic mindset flips that upside down. The modern urbanite says, this is my one life. I want to discover who I am. I want to chase my passions.
Yes.
They want to backpack through South America. They want to start a niche business. They want to train for marathons or dedicate their weekends to painting or simply have the freedom to sleep in until noon on a Sunday.
And let's be brutally honest. All of those individualistic goals, the travel, the hobbies, the uninterrupted sleep, the spontaneous dinners out, they are violently incompatible with having 3 young children.
Oh, absolutely.
Children require you to surrender your individualism. They demand your time, your money, and your physical energy. They require you to prioritize their needs above your own 24 hours a day.
I like to explain it using this analogy. In the past, life was like a single road. You get on the road and you drive. You grow up, get married, have kids, raise them, and grow old. Everyone in your village is on the exact same road, heading to the exact same destination.
That's a great way to put it.
It was predictable.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to agonize over your choices because there really weren't any other choices to make. But modern life is not a single road. Now, thanks to modern culture and social media, life is like a massive menu at a restaurant.
Yes, a very overwhelming menu.
Exactly. You sit down and you're handed a menu with 1,000 different options. You can choose travel, hobbies, or careers instead. You can order the digital nomad in Bali lifestyle. You can order the climb the corporate ladder in New York lifestyle. You can order the dink lifestyle, double income, no kids, where you and your partner spend your money entirely on yourselves. Having a large family is still on the menu, of course, but it's now competing with hundreds of other incredibly attractive, exciting options.
That restaurant analogy is perfect for understanding the modern dilemma. And we have to acknowledge the role of our environment in pushing us towards certain choices on that menu. Most of us now live in urban environments.
Right, let's explore that term. For our listeners, urban is a simple adjective relating to city living. It is the opposite of rural countryside living.
Exactly.
An urban lifestyle means dense populations, apartment buildings, public transit, and a fast-paced environment.
Cities are engines of economic growth, but they're uniquely hostile to large families. We talked about housing costs earlier, but think about the physical space.
Yeah, the literal square footage.
A tiny 500 square foot apartment on the 5th floor of a building is fine for a young professional. But add a screaming toddler, a stroller, toys, and a lack of outdoor garden space, and that urban dream quickly becomes a claustrophobic nightmare. Cities are built for individual workers, not for sprawling families.
And while the physical environment of the city restricts us, the digital environment of social media manipulates our desires. Social media actively changes the definition of what a successful life looks like.
This is a critical observation. How does social media change the narrative?
Well, think about what a good life looked like 50 years ago. If you saw a painting or an advertisement depicting success, it was usually a large family gathered around a massive dining table, carving a turkey or sharing a meal.
Right, the bustling household.
That chaotic, noisy, family-filled house was the pinnacle of achievement. But open Instagram or TikTok today. What is the algorithm feeding you as the image of success?
It's a hyper-curated aesthetic perfection.
Exactly. It's a 20-something influencer waking up in a perfectly minimalist, silent, spotless apartment. They are doing a 10-step skincare routine, drinking a $12 matcha latte, and then flying to Milan for the weekend.
It's all about individual experiences.
The modern image of success is total personal freedom, physical fitness, aesthetic perfection, and boundless disposable income. Social media constantly reinforces the idea that a good life is a frictionless, individualistic life. And it is virtually impossible to maintain that specific brand of frictionless success while you are dealing with the messy, exhausting, expensive reality of raising a family.
It creates an intense fear of missing out, or FOMO, for young people. They feel that by choosing parenthood, they are actively choosing to close the door on all these other glamorous possibilities that society tells them they should want.
But here is the crux of the issue. All of this cultural pressure, all of the urban constraints, and all of the economic costs would mean absolutely nothing if human biology still dictated the rules. If people couldn't control their fertility, the birth rates would still be high, regardless of how expensive apartments are. And that brings us to the ultimate game changer: technology and healthcare.
This is the mechanism that made the entire demographic shift possible. We are talking about the widespread availability of modern contraception.
Let's carefully and simply explain the word contraception so our B2 listeners fully grasp the impact here. Contraception refers to the tools, the medicines, or the medical devices used to choose when to have a baby.
Yes, often called birth control.
Right. Whether it's the daily pill, IUDs, or other methods, contraception severed the historical link between romantic, intimate relationships and the automatic creation of a baby.
It is difficult to overstate how revolutionary this is. For thousands of years of human history, fertility was something that happened to you. It was largely an act of nature, an act of fate. You got married, nature took its course, and babies arrived. You might have had 3, you might have got 9. The control you had over the situation was extremely limited.
Right. But medical advances put control entirely in the hands of the individual. It allowed people to actively plan their families.
Exactly.
And when we use the phrase plan their families, we mean people can literally sit down with a calendar and a spreadsheet and say, we will focus on our careers for the next 4 years. We will save $20,000. Then we will stop taking the birth control and we will attempt to have exactly 2 children spaced 3 years apart.
It turned reproduction from a biological inevitability into an economic and logistical project. And while that control is wonderful, it introduces a profound, heavy psychological burden that previous generations never had to carry.
I want to dig into that. What do you mean by a psychological burden? Isn't having control a purely good thing?
Control is good, but it requires intentionality.
Right.
When something just naturally happens, like an unexpected pregnancy in a pre-contraception world, human beings are remarkably resilient.
Yeah, we adapt.
Exactly. They adapt. They say, well, the baby is coming, we will figure it out, and they make the necessary sacrifices. The burden of the decision wasn't on them, it was just life happening.
I see where you're going.
But today, the default state for a young adult on contraception is no children. To have a child, you must make an active, deliberate, monumental decision to stop taking the medicine and disrupt your own life. Consciously say, I am choosing to invite massive financial stress, sleep deprivation, and relentless responsibility into my currently quiet, stable, predictable life.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Making the active choice to disrupt your own comfort is psychologically terrifying.
It is. When the burden of choice is entirely on the individual, the natural human response to such a massive, irreversible decision is hesitation. People delay. They say, let's wait 1 more year until we get promoted, then another year. And often, that endless delay turns into a permanent decision not to have kids at all.
So if we look at the grand puzzle, we have all these interlocking pieces. The cost of living is suffocating. Women are highly educated and fiercely independent. The culture celebrates individual freedom and travel. And technology allows us to perfectly control our biology. What happens when millions and millions of young adults all look at the math, look at their tiny urban apartments, and make the exact same choice to have fewer children at the exact same time?
You get a demographic crisis. You get a situation where the foundational structure of a nation begins to crack.
And to see what that looks like, we don't need to guess. We just have to look at countries where this crisis has already arrived in full force. We're looking at East Asia, specifically Japan and South Korea.
Yes, where the birth rates haven't just dropped, they have plummeted through the floor.
Exactly. These nations are experiencing serious population decline and aging populations. Let's break down those terms so our listeners understand the severity.
Good idea.
Population decline means exactly what it sounds like, but explained simply, it's a slowly shrinking group of people. It means more people are dying of old age each year than are being born. The total number of human beings living in the country is actively shrinking. Japan is losing hundreds of thousands of citizens every single year.
And coupled with that is the concept of an aging population. When we talk about an aging population, we aren't just saying that individuals are getting older. We're talking about a systemic shift where a massive percentage of the country is elderly.
I think the best way to visualize this for our listeners is not just a room full of people, but a pyramid. Think of a healthy, growing economy like a pyramid.
Right.
At the very wide bottom, you have millions and millions of young children and working-age adults. At the narrow top, you have a small number of elderly retirees. The wide base of young workers easily supports the small top through taxes, healthcare work, and economic production.
But an aging population takes that pyramid and flips it completely upside down. It becomes a top-heavy structure that is incredibly unstable.
Yeah.
In Japan, you look at the demographic data and you see a massive bulge of elderly citizens in their 70s and 80s at the top being supported by a tiny, shrinking base of young workers at the bottom.
And their governments are absolutely terrified. They are panicking. They look at the inverted pyramid and realize their economies are going to collapse. So what do? They try to offer financial support to encourage births.
Yeah.
In South Korea and Japan, the governments are literally handing out thousands of dollars in cash bonuses for every child born.
They are also restructuring employment laws to offer extensive parental leave. For our B2 learners, parental leave is a crucial workplace term.
Right.
It refers to official, legally protected, paid time off work for new parents. It means a mother, and increasingly a father, can take 6 months or even a year off work to bond with their newborn, while the government or the company continues to pay a portion of their salary.
It sounds like an absolute dream scenario. I mean, if the government came to you and said, please, have a baby. We will give you a stack of cash, we will guarantee your job, and we will give you a year of paid vacation, you would think people would be lining up to start families.
And yet it isn't working. The birth rates in South Korea continue to hit new world record lows every single year, despite billions of dollars spent by the government.
Wow.
Which raises an important question. Can a government actually buy a higher birth rate?
The data screams no. But why? If they are throwing money at the problem, offering financial support and childcare programs, why aren't people having kids?
Because a cash bonus cannot fix a toxic, exhausting culture. Simply offering financial support and parental leave isn't enough to reverse the cultural and economic trends we discussed earlier.
Right.
South Korea is the perfect example. The culture of work and education there is notoriously intense. We're talking about a corporate culture where leaving the office before your boss is considered highly disrespectful, and massive work weeks are normal.
And it isn't just the parents working themselves to the bone, it's the children too. The societal pressure to succeed academically is so fierce that parents feel forced to spend fortunes sending their children to private evening school.
Exactly. The financial and emotional toll this takes on a family is staggering.
So, returning to our restaurant menu analogy, the government is essentially putting a massive discount coupon on the have a baby meal. But it doesn't matter how cheap that meal is, if the restaurant is incredibly stressful, the music is too loud, and the chairs are uncomfortable.
That's a great point.
The citizens are looking at the realities of the brutal academic competition, the tiny apartments, and they say, no thank you, keep your cash bonus. I'll take the focus on my own peace of mind meal instead.
You simply cannot bribe someone to subject themselves to a lifestyle that they view as fundamentally exhausting and incompatible with personal happiness. The economic incentives don't outweigh the cultural realities.
So what does this all mean? If these rich, developed countries can't fix it, is the whole world shrinking? Are humans just going to slowly fade away?
That is a very dramatic way to phrase it, but it leads us to look at the rest of the world to see if everyone is experiencing the exact same thing. We have to look at the global divide.
Okay, let's compare those terms for our language learners.
Yeah.
We discussed developed countries as rich, highly industrialized nations. On the other side, we have developing regions.
Right.
Using simple comparative adjectives, developing regions are countries that have poorer economies, their populations are much younger, and they're still in the active process of building their wealth and infrastructure. We are talking about parts of Africa and other regions.
Not every country is in the same situation. Because developing regions are still closer to that historical agrarian model we discussed earlier, their birth rates remain relatively high. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, it is still common for women to have 4, 5, or even 6 children on average.
Right.
However, the key insight from our research is that while their birth rates are high compared to Japan or Germany, they are actively falling compared to their own past.
This is the mind-blowing part. The word relatively is crucial here. Relative to Europe, Africa is booming. But relative to Africa 30 years ago, the number of children per family is slowly decreasing over time.
Exactly. Even in the most rural parts of the developing world, as soon as a village gets reliable electricity, as soon as a school is built that allows young girls to learn to read, the birth rate begins to drop.
So if we synthesize this data, we see that while the starting points are different, the global direction is exactly the same, a slow decrease in family size everywhere.
It is a universal human response to a changing environment, which forces us to ask the big questions. The trend creates massive questions about our future.
Yeah, let's clearly define macro level and micro level for our listeners, because this distinction is where the true debate lies. Macro means large scale. It's looking at the system as a whole, the global economy.
From a macro-level perspective, a shrinking, aging population is terrifying. Who will work? Who will support aging populations? Could shrinking populations cause severe economic problems?
Exactly. Going back to our inverted pyramid analogy, the macro-level fear is that the tiny base of young workers will be crushed under the massive weight of paying for the elderly generation above them.
Right. That is the pessimistic economic view. But our analysis shows that it's not entirely negative.
Right.
Yes, there is a silver lining. We find it when we zoom in and look at the micro level. Micro means small scale. Instead of looking at the giant economy, we look at the individual person or the single household.
And on the micro level, things look much brighter.
Exactly. For the first time in human history, parenthood is transitioning from a rigid social expectation to a genuine personal choice.
Let's discuss that phrase, social expectation. For our B2 learners, a social expectation is an invisible rule, something society tells you that you must do. 50 years ago, getting married and having children was a massive social expectation. If you didn't do it, people judged you. But today, parenthood is a personal choice, not a social expectation. Society is learning to accept that individuals have the right to focus on their career or personal peace.
And for the people who do choose to have children, smaller families can mean better education, health care, and opportunities per child.
Yeah, having just one child means all a family's resources, time, and love can go into giving that one child a highly educated, healthy start in life. The parents can afford healthy food and private tutors without being stretched hopelessly thin.
It creates an incredible paradox. We have to weigh the macro-level economic problems, like who will do the jobs and pay the taxes to support the elderly, against the micro-level benefits of happier, better-resourced individual families.
It's the ultimate trade-off. And that brings us to the culmination of our discussion today. Let's take a moment to summarize this incredible historical flip.
It really is incredible.
For literally thousands of years, the primary anxiety of the human race was survival. Then in the 20th century, the population exploded, and we became terrified of having too many people. Yet today, for the first time in modern history, governments are more terrified of having too few babies rather than too many people.
The future depends entirely on how economics, technology, and culture shape the lives of younger generations.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you, our listener, with a brand new thought to ponder on your own. We spent a lot of time discussing how modern, fast-paced urban life makes having children so difficult and expensive. We expect people to work like they don't have children and raise children like they don't have jobs.
It is a systemic contradiction.
So here is my question to you. If the current system simply doesn't work for human biology, will future societies have to completely tear down and redesign what a standard workday or a city looks like just to make human family life possible again? Will we have to destroy the idea of the 9-to-5 corporate office so parents have the space and time to raise kids?
That is a brilliant, radical question. It implies that we might eventually be forced to adapt the global economy to fit human nature instead of the other way around.
Exactly. I highly encourage you to spend some time thinking about that idea today. We want to thank you so much for joining us for this session of ESL Listening Practice. We hope we helped you master some complex vocabulary and understand the invisible forces shaping our world. Keep studying and keep questioning the world around you.
It has been a pleasure guiding you through these ideas. Keep up the excellent work with your language studies.
Goodbye for now.